I welcome you all. Very good evening. And since Principal Madam could not join due to poor connectivity, I, as coordinator of IQAC Bethune College, welcome you all. Thank you all for your tremendous response. First of all, on behalf of Bethune College, I welcome our speakers, Professor Shoikat Sinha Roy, Professor Moinak Bishwas, and Professor Ruchira Goswami. I hope you will enjoy and you will have a very good session. Thank you all. And over to Moitri.
Wish you all a very good evening. It gives me immense pleasure to conduct the second webinar of the webinar series titled Thoughts and Reflections in the Time of COVID-19, Science, Economy, Polity and Culture, organized by the Internal Quality Assurance Cell, Bethune College, Kolkata. The world would surely remember 2020. We are facing situations that many of us have never thought of or experienced previously. The globalized world is fighting against an invisible enemy, and in this globalized world, we find ourselves confined within the four walls of our home in fear and uncertainty. Production has stopped, export-import has been curtailed, people are being laid off. We are maintaining social distancing. The term by itself can have very many interpretations, and the society in which we live are accustomed to, what we are accustomed to is showing very different, hitherto unexperienced situations. And as social beings, our only way of connecting turns out to be social media. Hence, social media have started occupying a major portion of our everyday livelihood. We are here today with three very distinguished guests who will deliver their lectures on the topic COVID-19, economy, polity, and social media. We are honored to have Professor Shoikat Sinha Roy, Professor Ruchira Goswami, and Professor Moinak Bishwas with us. We would start with the first lecture of the series and of this second webinar, and I would try to introduce Professor Shoikat Sinha Roy to all our viewers. Professor Shoikat Sinha Roy is professor in the Department of Economics, Jadavpur University, Kolkata. Currently, he is also the coordinator of the UGC Center for Advanced Studies, Department of Economics, Jadavpur University. Till recently, he was the joint director of School of International Relations and Strategic Studies, Jadavpur University. He is a member steering committee for promotion of exports for West Bengal, Department of Commerce and Industry, Government of West Bengal, and also a member standing technical committee of experts to review Exim Bank's export leading index model to forecast India's exports, Exim Bank of India, Mumbai, and member Technical Advisory Committee, Social Science Division, Indian Statistical Institute. He holds an MPhil and a PhD from JNU New Delhi, done at the Center for Development Studies, Trivandrum, India. Dr. Sinha Roy's areas of academic interests include open economy, macroeconomics, trade, development, applied trade modeling, applied economics, and issues related to emerging market economies. Prior to joining Jadavpur University, he was a fellow at the Research and Information System for Developing Countries, New Delhi. He also worked briefly at the Asian Development Bank, India Resident Mission, New Delhi. He was a British Academy of Social Sciences visiting fellow to the Department of Economics, Lancaster University in 2009. Recently, he completed a British High Commission New Delhi funded policy research project on state-level exports, competitiveness, and trade promotion policies, the Indian case study. Currently, is a part of a global research team working on a multi-country research project titled Special Economic Zones, a force for good to reduce inequality, funded by Volkswagen Germany. He has published in various national and international journals, monographs, and in edited volumes. Recently, he has co-edited a book titled International Trade and International Finance, Explorations of Contemporary Issues, published by Springer. Over to Professor Shoykot Sinha Roy.
Thank you, Dr. Ghosh and Dr. Shom, for your kind words. It's a pleasure to be back to the Bethune College. I don't know what time it is, because but in a different mode. It's a very thoughtful, it is very thoughtful of IQAC Bethune College, the principal, to have a seminar or a webinar series on thoughts and reflections in the times of COVID-19 pandemic. What I would try to do is to speak on the economy today. I don't know in the earlier webinar whether anybody has spoken on the economy. So let me start by speaking about the economy a little bit, and then its implications on the rest of the economy and the way to go forward. That would be my scheme of the talk. As you would see, the COVID-19 has thrown all the economies of the gear. And what is the status of the spread of COVID-19? I have taken the global data, and just to highlight certain points that I have taken few countries which did show improvement, or some countries which did not show improvement. For instance, if you look at Australia, is it visible? This is the Australia's graph. Then you would see Brazil's graph. Brazil's graph does not show any improvement. It's a continuously rising curve of new cases. Then I would show you China, where it all started from. And in China, you would see that it peaked in certain period and then it died down. And you would see the two lines which tell you about the lockdown. And the day zero is First January 2020, and then it goes on the x-axis, it goes on like this. So China's thing has died down, though there are a few cases of and now. And now we come to India, and if you look at India, then you would see the number of new cases is continuously rising, and often it is said that in India it's an exponential curve, which is of new cases. And if you look at the total number of cases, there also you would see an exponential curve. If you look at Spain, which was in the focus, you would see in Spain also it peaked in one period, but it had died down during the lockdown period. The inter-lockdown period, the two vertical lines will tell you the lockdown period in Spain. If you look at United Kingdom has slowed down in the new number of cases. So is the United States. In United States, also the new caseload has come down. So what I would like to say is that in this process, what has happened, India stands out, and India and Brazil, they stand out rather in the whole process of COVID-19 scare, in the spread of COVID-19. Now, what does COVID-19 has brought to the fore? How it has impacted the economy? Let me talk a little bit on that. Now, I take a position that with respect to COVID-19, what has happened, and I follow a classic paper which came out recently in the Economic and Political Weekly by Professor Dipankar Dasgupta, earlier with Indian Statistical Institute, Kolkata and Delhi, and Meenakshi Rajiv of Isaac Bangalore. They wrote an excellent paper, and they have characterized how the economy has come to in the time of COVID. What has happened? What has happened during this period is the following. That's the third week of March. The entire supply side in the economy has stopped. So there is an artificial supply side crisis. But is it the only crisis that we had in the economy? It's not the only crisis that we have in the economy. If you look at the economy since 2016 and 17, you would see that there is a growth slowdown. And the first graph that I am showing you is, it tells you about the growth slowdown, that it peaked in 2016-17, and it was low, though it was low from 2010 onwards, but in the midst of this low growth, it somehow peaked in first quarter of 2016-17, and then there is a secular decline. So there is a decline of the economy. The economy had, prior to COVID-19, the economy had already started slowing down. If you look at the quarterly growth, if you look at India's quarterly GDP growth, you would see that after the first quarter, after the second quarter 2016-17, there is a sharp decline from the third quarter, and it declined till the first quarter of 2017-18. It marginally picked up, but it never reached the peak in 2016-17, and then to decline further. So the economy is in a continuous process of decline. That's the first fact. And on top of that, you get the COVID spread, the lockdown. There is an artificial supply shock. Why did the economy collapse prior to that? We need to take it from the literature. The economy collapsed prior to that on account of demand shocks in the economy. The demand shocks in the economy came right from the beginning. The demand shocks in the economy came right from 2016-17, and or even earlier, 2010-11, and the demand shocks were mostly in terms of low investment growth. Low investment growth would mean particularly investment by the private sector in the economy. Then you have low consumption growth, and in India and in most developing countries of Asia, one would recall time and again we had said that all these economies are led by internal or domestic consumption. And once domestic consumption had started slowing down, the economy had gone out of gears. So first it was a demand shock, which is generated from within the economy, and then there is a supply shock, which the COVID spread or the lockdown started doing. Now, this is a classic case that you cannot have, earlier never, it was both demand shock and supply shock playing together. So often in times of crisis, from the Keynesian times, it has been said that if you look at the demand management policies, the demand management policies would work. But now, when you have a situation when there is both demand and supply shock, whether both demand and supply, when both demand and supply shocks are there in the economy, whether only demand management policies would work. Now I move to the third thing, the third point that I said, along with growth, if you look at employment, this is the latest employment figure of the economy. If you look at employment, then you would see that the employment, if you look at the employment figures, you would see that employment is mostly in the economy in 2018-19, prior to the COVID crisis, which is the latest data that we have. Most of the workers would come from the regular informal sector, and there are casual or contractual workers. So there are very few people who are regular workers with a long-term contract. Long-term contract would mean which is about a contract above 3 years. That is only 2% of the total. And if you look at the male-female distribution, it is lower for female, obviously, as is always the case, and it's little higher, marginally higher for the male. Now, this is the employment situation. Now, what is the ramification that would happen? So the COVID scare, the lockdown, would throw most of these casual workers, informal, regular workers out of the job, because the production has stopped suddenly in the economy. And you would see the crisis relating to the migrant workers. It's not only migrant workers, even people who have not migrated for jobs elsewhere, for them also, most of the people have lost jobs. There is an estimate by the Center for Monitoring of Indian Economy, which tells you that only in April 2020, in April 2020, 122 million people have lost their jobs. So, and as the lockdown proceeded in May, more and more people went out of the job market. So you can imagine the kind of unemployment that the initial demand shock followed by the supply shock, which has led the economy to. Then what did it lead the economy to? First, it's growth slowdown, growth halting, production halting, then it's unemployment, rampant, large-scale, widespread unemployment, and then you have inequality. We see in the post-globalization period, even if the economy's growth rates had increased, poverty rates had declined, but inequality increased in the economy. And there has been incidents of rising inequality since 1993-94. The widening gap, there is a widening gap between the top two deciles of the population and the bottom two deciles of the population. And if you look at the states, you would see that the states which have produced maximum, Tamil Nadu, Maharashtra, Karnataka, and quite glaringly Kerala, there the inequality is higher than the average inequality of India. This is for the 11-12 data, because in India, as you know, there was a deep crisis with regards to the consumer expenditure survey data, which the NSSO brings out, which was not brought out in 2017-18, and hence inequality estimates cannot be updated. But this rising in incidence of rising inequality has often been alluded to different factors, and among that, the first factor is the structural transformation of the economy. If you look at the structural transformation of the economy towards a more export-oriented economy, towards a more manufacturing and more service-oriented economy, the service sector, which requires skilled labor, that has actually widened the income gaps between people. So your income inequality is said to depend, and it is, the evidence is across states. Now, this has happened. In a recent paper, me and my student Rudra Prasad Roy, we have done a study of Indian states, and from where I give you this data, this graph, there we have shown its structural transformation is one of the culprits which led to, and the rising growth of the services sector, which is one of the culprits of rising inequality in India. Now, if you think of that, then what do we do? Now, in the process of production, so you have production slowing down, you have growth almost halting, coming to zero, and it is predicted that in the next year it will be a negative growth. Third, there is rising unemployment, and fourth, there is an apprehension that there will be rising inequality in the economy. Now, what are the ways out? Traditionally, if a government talks about ways to come out of the crisis, it generally talks about demand management policies. As I told you before, it has happened from Lord Maynard Keynes's time, 1929, Great Depression that took the world, and Keynesian policies are essentially demand management policies. Now, demand management policies work only when there is a demand-led crisis. But as it is characterized by Dipankar Dasgupta and Meenakshi Rajiv, I am ready to buy their characterization. This is not a demand-led crisis. It is demand and supply both stopping at the same time. So what did it lead to? It, apart from this, which is the worst affected sector in the economy? The worst affected sector in this economy is the micro, small, medium enterprise and the agricultural sector. But the agricultural sector, as there is normal monsoon that is expected this year, or little more than normal monsoon that is expected this year, agriculture is expected to bounce back and give some cushioning to the rest of the economy. But what has happened to the micro, small and medium enterprises? Now, with regards to demand management policies, the government has not announced any fiscal measure. By demand management policy, we generally say they are fiscal measures. Fiscal measures means government pumping in money to the rest of the economy, to the micro, small, medium enterprises. The government has announced that there will be a 3 lakh crore out of the 20 lakh crore stimulus package that it has announced, but 3 lakh crore, let us disentangle what that 3 lakh crore would mean. It has not announced any fiscal package out of that. Fiscal package means giving larges, giving things to the micro, small, medium enterprises, giving tax concessions to the micro, small, medium enterprises. What the government has done instead, the government has taken 2 steps. One, it has given some incentives so that these sectors take some loan from the government and move forward. So it is essentially a monetary policy driven incentive that the government has given. And the second thing that the government has given is some reforms package by way of trying to reorganize the micro, small, medium enterprises. Now, what is the package that the government has announced? It has announced 3 lakh crore collateral-free loans, which the enterprises have to avail by 31st October 2020. Second thing that they have said, that if MSMEs declare their NPAs, they will be eligible for certain loans, equity support up to a provision of 20,000 crore as subordinate debt. Then there is 50,000 crore equity infusion. These three are mainly monetary policies. So by way of loan, so the interest rates, the Reserve Bank has reduced the reverse repo rate and given some incentives to the bank. The capital infusion will go to the bank, and in turn the banks will lend to the MSMEs. Now, will the MSMEs take the loan? The MSMEs will not take the loan unless they have some demands for their products placed in front of them. Who will place the demand? The domestic economy is not in a situation of revival. The revival has to necessarily come from the consumption. Consumption has not picked up. Large number of people are thrown out of employment. So consumption has almost halted. So demand for MSME products from within the domestic economy is unlikely. Next, the demand has to come from the foreign sector. The demand has to come from the foreign sector, but we have stopped our exports right at the moment. And even if exports resume, but production for exports might not start, because our exports, my research with Maitri Ghosh has said, we found that these exports are largely dependent on raw materials and capital goods imports from abroad. And unless these raw materials are imported from abroad, and mostly from China, unless we are able to produce them domestically or import them from the rest of the world, production for exports will not resume. So even if there is capital infusion, the MSMEs are unlikely to turn around. The banks, on the other hand, are reluctant. There is a survey. I know there is a survey that has been carried out in Tamil Nadu. I know there is a survey that is carried out in West Bengal, and there are many surveys that are going on simultaneously all over the country. And these surveys would indicate that even if the MSMEs, very few MSMEs are going for a loan, but even if the MSMEs go to the bank for a loan, the banks would prefer to lend it to large corporations than to and they would lend it to large corporations a large sum of money than small amounts to this micro, small, and medium enterprise. I would show you a very telling graph like this. The graph would tell you that in micro, small, and medium sector, there is a negative growth in credit, negative credit growth in April. That's the last figure we have in April, whereas in the large sector, there is an increase, which is a lower increase, but still there is an increase. So whatever credit disbursement has happened by the bank, that has mostly gone to the large sector, and it has not addressed the micro, medium. And so the policy which the government has taken is not a very kind policy which will help the micro, small, medium enterprises to come back. Second, there is some reservation which the government has done, which is with respect to disallowing global tenders. The global tenders were allowed, but in such schemes up to 2,200 crores. Now, a small, micro, small, medium enterprise, a medium, small, medium enterprise might, but a micro and small enterprise may not have schemes up to rupees 200 crores. And even if medium enterprises have, in the total distribution of this sector, medium enterprise not even account for 1% of the total number of MSME sector. So this is a general necessary amendment, but that may not lead to the turnaround of the sector. The government has committed that it will clear all MSME dues, but that is yet to be forthcoming. And the last but not the least, the MSME definition has been revised. MSME definition has been revised, and this is revised to cater not the domestic economy or for the MSMEs to bounce back. It is for the MSMEs to take loan and find a place in the global value chain when the global value chain starts resumption. Now, this is the kind of scheme the government has. What the scheme, the MSME focus does not lead, it does not identify or give identity, separate identity to the small, medium, or micro sector. They need to be treated separately. They need unique identity for establishments. There is too much dependency on the banking channel, and as these are all credit backed. However, major chunks of MSMEs are, it is to be noted that most of these MSMEs are not even financially inclusive if they are really micro or small, one-man enterprise. Infuse grants. So what is required? They have to infuse grant supports to fund losses and expenditure. What losses? Losses for paying wages to the workers, otherwise the workers will go out of job, and to cover the fixed cost of production, which has already been done. And there are a plethora of objectives, so these new schemes will again create confusions for the MSMEs to work upon and to bounce back. So what these things would essentially lead to, it will widen the inequality gap, the inequality between large enterprises and the MSME sector. And this will not lead to the economy to jump back, because with rising equality, there is increasing evidence all over the world that rising inequality actually deters growth in the economy. Now, the other thing, the last thing that I would like to say in this context is actually what is the way forward for the economy. Let the supply side resume as it is resuming. So the supply side constraints will ease off, but the government has to essentially, which it has not till now, till date, essentially take care of the demand side of the economy. The demand side of the economy has to be done through large scale cash transfers to the poor. So inequality will be taken care of one hand, consumption will rise in the economy, and the economy will bounce back to its original state, pre-COVID state. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Professor Sinha Roy. So we would now move on to our next speaker, Professor Ruchira Goswami, and may I introduce Professor Goswami to all our viewers. Professor Ruchira Goswami teaches at the National University of Sciences, Calcutta, where she offers courses in sociology, human rights, gender and law, child rights, and film and law. She was the head of the Center for Child Rights, NUJS, a multidisciplinary center set up in partnership with UNICEF with the mandate of research, documentation, and advocacy on child rights issues. A British Chevening scholar in human rights from London School of Economics, her areas of interest include feminist movements and legal reforms, child rights, representation of law in films, and intellectual property and human rights. Her publications are in international rights, human rights law and women's rights, intellectual property and women's rights, right to food, etc. She has taught in a number of institutions, including President's University, Calcutta, Jadavpur University, and also in International Development Studies, University of Oslo, Norway. She is closely associated with several human rights organizations in the city and outside, and conducts workshops and capacity building programs on human rights issues with various stakeholders. So over to Professor Ruchira Goswami.
Thank you, Moitri. Thank you, Professor Ghosh and Professor Shom, for giving me an opportunity to share my thoughts on the pandemic and social divisions. It's a pleasure and a privilege to be a part of this webinar organized by the IQAC cell of Bethune College. So what I want to discuss is how is this pandemic increasing social inequalities. So, and in that context, I'll be talking about social distancing. So essentially, I have a very simple argument, which is that existing social hierarchies and socio-economic inequalities have increased and will increase in any situation of crisis, in case the COVID-19 pandemic. So while it is true that a virus doesn't distinguish between social divisions and hierarchies of the rich, poor, white, or the colored person, the man, woman, the upper caste, Dalit, non-disabled, and the disabled body, it is clear that the major brunt of the pandemic is on the disadvantaged and marginalized section of the society. Hence, it is not fair or correct to state that the virus is affecting everybody equally, because it doesn't. As somebody has discussed in an article in the Hindu, Amitanshu Acharya, in an article entitled Pandemic and Prejudice, he says that the story of people and pathogens is a complex one. And pathogens want to live, and it needs humans as hosts. It doesn't want the human to die. Now, diseases don't distinguish between race, gender, ethnicity, etc. But history shows that whenever there is an outbreak, social divisions and hierarchies amplify, and deep-rooted social prejudices resurface. So that's precisely the point I'm trying to make, that if we look at global inequalities and social divisions and hierarchies in India of caste, class, gender, able-bodiedness, sexuality, in all of this, all of it is the social hierarchies and the inequalities basically sharpen and amplify because of what the pandemic is doing to us. So let's start from the three major things that we are expected to do in the pandemic. And these are all arguments that people have been making continuously. My point is just to bring them together, which is the three major safety practices that have been that people have been asked to follow globally. One is remain at home and work from home, frequent washing of hands with soaps, and social distance. All these three measures are the ones which only the middle and the middle class and the rich can afford globally. These are luxuries for the less privileged parts of the society. So we will come back to this term social distancing in a while, but before that, let me also now go to something that the Guardian discusses and talks about the emergence of four distinct groups in society. They are overlapping, but they are now four distinct groups, and interestingly calls them these, which is, the first group is called the remotes. Who are the remotes? The professional, managerial, and technical workers, the privileged middle class who is better off, who might be facing the brunt of pay cuts, is bored, is anxious, but essentially much better off. So they are the remotes. The second group are the essentials. Who are there? Nurses, child and elder care workers, sanitation workers, police, people who lack protective gear, they lack health insurance, and they are not getting any sick leave. The third group are the unpaid. And the unpaid is the teeming millions of workers that we see worldwide who are losing jobs, mainly in the informal and in the private sector, right? The unpaid population, and also not only the ones who have been laid off, but also say women and other groups who are continuously bearing the brunt of unpaid labor. And finally, the fourth group that has emerged in the pandemic, and we need to talk about them a little more, is the group called the forgotten. Who are they? The prisoners, immigrants, homeless, and in the context of India, the migrant workers. We woke up to the migrant workers' plight much, much later, and not when the lockdown was announced. So in the global or in the US context, the forgotten, the unpaid, and the essentials, the three less privileged group, would be ethnic minorities, and they would be men and women of color. So they will essentially be poor, Latino, and African American men and women. In the context of India, they would be Adivasis, backward castes, Dalit, religious and ethnic minorities, who would constitute these three categories. What the Guardian did not categorize is the group called the rich, right? Who, as Professor Sinara was talking about, that it's not really the pandemic which has increased the inequality. The inequality was always existing, and it had increased since the globalization. So the rich continue to be richer and the poor continue to be poorer. So let's talk a little more about, in terms of class inequality. And as Professor Henryk Domanski, he's a professor at the Institute of Philosophy and Sociology of the Polish Academy of Sciences in Poland, he's of the opinion that in terms of accessing healthcare, it is people who are higher in the hierarchy who will seek treatment. They are the ones who will maintain hygiene and safety practices. And when the vaccine is brought out, they'll be the first to be vaccinated. We can clearly see that this is not true for Poland. This is as much true for India, right? We are the ones, the middle class is the one who is perhaps the most conscious of keeping social distances and, you know, maintaining hygiene and buying sanitizers, etc. off the shelves, right? Not only that, it is because that the middle class can afford to do so, but also because of the knowledge, which is a part of cultural capital, that good health is an investment, and they understand the importance of health for professional investment, for professional purposes. And that is why the middle class would invest in health, not only because they can do so economically, but also because they choose to do that, and because they know that this is a kind of an investment. Now, lower income groups, as we clearly know, will not be able to afford healthcare, given that we do not have very sound social security measures. We do not have solid health policies for everybody. Also, we know that health is not one of their urgent needs. You know, when you are faced with malnutrition, hunger, homelessness, poverty, then health and social distancing will take a back seat. And also globally, we know that the poor and therefore the less privileged, the less literate would also perhaps be suspicious of vaccination, right? So in India also, as well as globally, it will be the poor who will perhaps avoid testing if it is done mandatorily, right? Because we know that they would become the targets of these interventions, and they would not like to test themselves simply out of fear, because you don't know, because the poor would not know what's going to happen while in quarantine. And we know what these quarantine facilities are, really, really dilapidated conditions. And there has been a hue and cry against such quarantine mechanisms, you know, they are pathetic conditions. So coupled with little knowledge of the virus, we really don't know what's happening, who's doing it, etc. There could be scant regard for the law. And often we see that the middle class is saying this whenever there is a slum next to a high rise, and we say, you know, the people in the slums are not following these rules. You know, they are the ones who are not wearing masks. They're all sitting outside their homes, and, you know, they are perpetually creating conditions for the virus to spread. And so this would be out of fear, out of scandal for the law, and the divide between the rich and the poor, between the middle class and the less privileged, is just going to increase over health issues, right? So we also know that globally and in India, the hardest hit areas where the virus has spread has been the poorest of neighborhoods. So we have data that says that the poorest neighborhoods of the New York City, where the virus is spread like wildfire, would be Queens, Brooklyn, Bronx. These are the areas. Say in Maharashtra, in Mumbai, it would be Dharavi. So clearly we know where it is impossible to maintain social distance, where it's impossible to have any kind of these processes that are being suggested, washing of hands and all, where people live in a 10 people live in a 10 feet by 10 feet home. It's impossible for the virus not to spread. Right? Now, this has also created conditions, as the World Socialist website is claiming, that there is a class struggle that is also erupting. You know, there is a rising movement of workers at Amazon, at various grocery stores, and people who are on essential services, and India, medical professionals, that we do not have the protective equipment, we do not have insurance, and what is going to happen to us if we now if we now get virus. So taking off from these kinds of class angles that the pandemic has thrown up, let's go into this term that Professor Ghosh had told in the beginning, that the term social distancing is a complex one. And also, I think when we started using the term, that was kind of callous to use the social distance instead of using the word physical distance, because that is what is happening, right? The requirement for preventing the virus is that there be physical distance between people and not social distance, because the word social incorporates lots more than physical distance, right? Now, this social distance phenomenon in India is reflecting and revealing class-caste continuum in a very, very big way. So let's talk a little more about the caste-class continuum in social distance. Now, the tendency to emphasize separateness has always been a characteristic of high-ranking categories. Now, middle-class leisure has always been individualized, you know, watching Netflix alone, listening to music on a headphone, reading a book with a cup of coffee in the corners of a comfortable home. So leisure for the middle class is an individualized phenomenon, and separateness is also to demonstrate one's own exclusivity. So it creates a distance from others, it creates social barriers. Now, this is as much true of a class phenomenon as much it is for a caste phenomenon, and that is what I want to discuss now. Now, this emphasis on social distancing has increased, and it has brought to the surface our deep caste, class prejudices and anxieties. So when the lockdown started, one of the first things that we did was to stop immediately domestic help and other service people to come into our homes, right? That is what gated communities, big residential, high rises and complexes did. That it seemed that the virus would spread from the slums, from the less privileged neighborhoods into the privileged middle class homes, and that is why we need to segregate. Of course, we were not using a caste class logic. We were saying that this is for purposes of health and hygiene, but subconsciously, I think, the prejudices of caste class came out very, very clearly. Now, somehow, when we talk about this, this physical or social distancing, it is also a kind of untouchability. And I'm using the term very deliberately here to talk about how deep-set prejudices of caste and the practices of caste have now resurfaced thanks to the pandemic. Now, vertical social distance was easily achieved. You know, we stopped people from any service people coming from less privileged backgrounds. We stopped them. We stopped electricians, plumbers, people to walk in our homes, drive us, all that was stopped, right? So, that was okay with us. Also, we found on TV images of the police beating people. That was very, very obvious, especially and essentially poor young men who went out during the lockdown. And there are images from all over India, especially northern India, that the police are beating people so that they stay at home. And we, the middle class, kept on saying, yes, why can't these people stay at home? Clearly, what is the home that we are talking about? What does this mean that they would stay at home? It's also understood that the police was under a tremendous strain to follow the norm, to pressurize people to follow the norms. But it clearly does not justify their actions of beating or punishing people for breaking the laws, right? Now, social distancing and segregation, the things that we are practicing during the pandemic, remind us of, as I said earlier, of the caste practice on untouchability. Untouchability thrives on these two principles, right? Now, there could be a legitimization and justification of untouchability in current times. And also what I fear is that there seems to be a global recognition and acceptance of social distance, which means that caste practices of purity pollution becomes legitimated. And also for Hindu apologists and caste practitioners, it could mean that, see, we have done this for years. We always practice purity pollution. We washed hands when we came back from outside. We took a bath and etc. And this is, we didn't touch. We didn't do a handshake. We always left our shoes outside the home. We did not mix with everybody. And this is what the Savarna Dharma taught us. And see, this is what the whole world expects us to do. And that is why we are also saying that in current times, it's become easy for Indians to adopt to the principles of social distancing compared to other nations who are saying that, there is an enormous lifestyle change. For the upper caste Hindu, that might not be so much of an enormous lifestyle change anyway, because we have practiced purity pollution and social distancing for a very long time. Now, let's also look at the caste class continuum in terms of what we did to the migrant workers. Now, who are these migrant workers? The faceless multitude, the faceless millions are people who come from not only poor backgrounds, but they are essentially Adivasis, backward castes, and Dalits, right? So we all know the case of Jamlo Makta, right? The 12-year-old minor who died on her way back, walking to her home. Spraying of disinfectants on the migrant workers is reeks of our caste and class prejudice, because we would never do that on the middle class migrant who's coming from abroad. For the middle class migrant or the guy who's stranded abroad, we have special flights to fly them back. But for the migrant worker, you have a disinfectant spray, you have nothing, and they walk miles home. So I will not talk about the plight of migrant workers because a lot already has been said now, but the caste class continuum is very, very clear here. Now I'll also talk about something else that Professor Badri Narayan is arguing, and he's saying that the fear of infection justifies the need for social distancing, but this social distancing is not simply a vertical one. So it is not only a distancing that the upper class does on the lower class or the upper caste does on the lower caste, but it is also a horizontal social distance. That is something which is new. The pandemic creates a social habit to perceive otherness, not only at the level of caste, but at the level of the biological body. So I've moved away from a discussion on the caste to a discussion of that every body, every single body is otherized. And therefore, it is not just a vertical social distancing, but a horizontal social distancing. The neighbor, the guy next door, my neighbor, everybody needs to wear a mask. Everybody needs to wear a distance. So every other body becomes the other, right? It is a case of untouchability at the horizontal level from one body to another. The pandemic will foster, according to Badri Narayan, will foster horizontal untouchability and not only the vertical untouchability, which is based on caste. So this is a new kind of a point for social distance that is emerging. I'll move over to the third point from caste, and just touching upon the various kind of inequities that are surfacing and what has gender got to do, and again, how the major brunt of the pandemic is on the women is also coming out. So what are we seeing in the pandemic? Why we are seeing that more caregiving and housework is with women. Women are doing cooking, cleaning, child and elder care, and there have been jokes also around. I don't want to talk about that. Now, women face far more economic stress. That is, women are first to be laid off. They are in part-time, precarious jobs in the informal and in the semi-formal sectors, and they are the first ones who would be laid off with job cuts in the market. While poverty itself is gendered, we clearly know of a gender pay gap. We know that the worst affected in the pandemic would be African American women of color, Dalit women, low caste, backward caste, indigenous women, women with disabilities, and single women. More gender-based violence and less access to support services is something that the pandemic is throwing up. So apart from the fact that women have to bear the brunt of unpaid labor all the more and the first to be laid off, something globally that has come up since the pandemic and the lockdown was announced, more or less from March globally and also in India, is that there are increasing rates of domestic violence globally. So to quickly talk about domestic violence globally, in China, domestic violence rate tripled in this period between March and April to mid-May, from when the data is gleaned. In France, it is 30% increase. Brazil saw a 40 to 50% increase. In Italy and Spain, there was also an increase. And in Spain, there were also domestic violence related murders. Interestingly, from the US, certain reports have come out that perpetrators are using COVID-19 as a weapon, which is they are forbidding hand washing. So they are forbidding their intimate partners, female members of the family, to hand wash, and therefore increasing the victim's fear to contact the virus. In India, incidents of domestic violence have gone up hugely, and in the WHO has actually declared that the risk of intimate partner violence is likely to increase, and the UN chief also called for measures to address what he calls horrifying global surge in domestic violence. In April, the Delhi High Court directed the center and the state government of Delhi to hold meetings to curb domestic violence. If we look at the data from the National Commission of Women, we see that in 25 days, from March 23rd to April 16th, that March 23rd being the day of the lockdown, to April 16th, the Commission received 239 complaints by email and by WhatsApp, which is double the number of complaints that the Commission received between February and March. Now, a point to be noted is that 239 complaints received by email and WhatsApp would mean that only people who have access to net facilities and access to email and are literate were bringing in complaints to the commission. Also to be noted globally and in India, by the time the service sector, people from the commission elsewhere, or the police moved into action and went into the victim's home, the perpetrator had left the scene. So it is very clear that with the lockdown, women could not complain when the perpetrator was around. She could only use the helpline or email when the perpetrator was not on scene. So that is very, very clear. Right? Also, the Delhi, the DCP Operations and Communication, he had said that between March, April, and May, they were getting around 1,000, 1,200 calls per day, mostly cases of domestic violence, which is far more than the previous times, right? So we need to look at the kind of gender-based violence that has gone up during the pandemic. Now, this is not only true for men, this is also true for people of non-normative sexualities, for trans persons, for whom the home is where the violent place is. So when we talk about, everybody stay at home, there is an assumption that the home is a space. But very clearly, for women, for a lot of young children, for trans persons, for people with non-normative sexualities, the home is where the site of violence is. The home is the space where violence occurs. And the inability to go out and seek reprieve elsewhere has tremendous mental and physical trauma. As we all know, cases of depression and various kinds of mental illness and mental conditions, problematic conditions have increased during the lockdown, simply because of this assumption that everybody needs to be at home, which really only works for the protect, not only for the middle class, but also only works in safe, egalitarian, democratic households. Elsewhere, the logic of staying at home simply doesn't work. So it's also important to note that it's not only women, but also not only cis women, but also for men and women of non-normative sexualities and trans person, the pandemic and the lockdown is of major consequence, of violent consequence. Quickly, to talk a little bit about what the virus has done in an already deeply communal environment is the case of the Tablighi Jamaat, and what the Tablighi Jamaat and the entire debate around that, the vilification of the Muslim population, and the role that the media played in this what we were doing to Muslims. And also very, very noticeable was that not only North India, but also in neighborhoods in Calcutta, we know that Muslim vendors, vegetable and fruit vendors, were prevented from coming into Hindu neighborhoods. There were cases of beating up, simply so these sectarian communal tensions that were there have increased and has completely sort of exacerbated during the times of the pandemic. So we really need to talk more about what it is. The pandemic has majorly thrown communal tensions at us, and we don't know how to deal with it. At a time when the only thing that we need to do is social cohesiveness, this kind of communal tension is out to destroy the already fraught social cohesiveness that we have here. Finally, to end, we also need to talk about not only religious minorities, but ethnic minorities. And there is little data that is coming out as to how ethnic minorities are treated in India. But I was at another webinar where a woman from the northeastern part of India was saying that with the pandemic and with this idea that the virus has come from China, and we are using these terms for people from northeast of India who anyway face a lot of ethnic ethnic sidelining, if I may say, have been facing this, that you are Chinese. For the person of the Northeast, the woman was probably from Manipur, and we see, people are saying that she's Chinese and they have brought the virus, and there is an increasing ethnic tension in many parts of India. I think we need to talk about that a lot more. I'm not very sure. I can stand corrected. That we need to talk about ethnic tensions. And finally, for persons with disabilities, on which we again need, I think, separate discussion, is that for persons with disabilities, especially persons with locomotor disabilities and other kinds of disabilities as well, they've said that the virus, the lockdown is not something peculiar to them. Persons with disabilities, because of their conditions, are generally also in non-pandemic normal times are homebound. The wheelchair user in India, the person with locomotor disability, simply anyway can't go out. So the pandemic and the lockdown hasn't done anything majorly different for them. But what it has done is that the access to support services, the access to several kinds of medical services that persons with disabilities, both physical and social disabilities need, that has stopped. So they cannot go out. We know of children who have to be taken with certain psychosocial disabilities, who need to be a part of a psychosocial network, who need to be given training, support. All of that has stopped. And parents are unable to grapple with or do that training at home. Education, and we know the final thing that I want to end with is also children, and especially children with disabilities who need certain kinds of special training perhaps at times. All that has stopped. The schools have stopped. And so the digital divide is on an all-time high. And while there is also this warrants a different discussion, that who has access to internet that we can start e-learning. So for a lot of children also, and for young adults, education has completely taken a back seat. And it's again only the privileged upper middle class children who will benefit from e-learning, and the rest will not. To end, the knowledge hierarchy is at its height. When the pandemic was declared, when the lockdown came through, we didn't know why is this coming, right? We had no idea what we are supposed to do. We had no idea of what we were expected to do. It just came from the top. It just came from the top. And we were expected to abide by the rules without questioning, without asking, why are we doing this? So this is where the problem lies. I think that what the pandemic has done is it has increased social inequalities across various kinds of social context, both globally and locally. And we need more sociological research into this as to where we will go from here. What would be the new dimensions of social economic research be? We need to come together in the times of the pandemic to create new ways of knowledge, and that is something that we need to achieve, to come together. But clearly, this kind of social research is going to take a backseat because of fund crunch. So that is where I would like to end and have more time for discussion. Thank you very much for giving me an opportunity to share my ideas. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Goswami. Thank you very much. Actually, from Professor Sinha Roy's lecture and your lecture as well, we have actually come through or learned a lot of inequalities that our economy, our society are living as such, like human beings in this big world, that has come to a totally different understanding altogether. So like in this kind of a situation, I think this is also the right time to research, to revisit our thoughts, our ideas, our arguments. So in this quest, I would now move on to our next speaker, Professor Moinag বিশ্বাস. But may I introduce Professor বিশ্বাস to all our viewers. Professor Moinag বিশ্বাস is Professor of Film Studies at Jadavpur University, where he has been teaching since the inception of the department in 1993. He is also the coordinator of the Media Lab, a center for experiments in digital forms at Jadavpur. He writes on Indian cinema and culture. Among his publications are Opu and After, Revisiting Ray's Cinema, Chaplin, and Ujan Gang Baya, and various essays in Bengali and English. He edits the Journal of the Moving Image and was one of the founding editors of Bioscope, South Asian Screen Studies. He has written and co-directed the award-winning Bengali feature film Thaniyo Shangbad in 2010, and has more recently created a video installation across the burning track commissioned for the 11th Shanghai Biennale 2016. He was Fulbright Nehru Academic and Professional Excellence Scholar at Columbia University, New York in 2019. Professor বিশ্বাস, please.
Thank you, Dr. Ghosh. Can you hear me?
Yeah, of course.
And I should also thank the other organizers, including my friend Shumanto Mukhopadhyay, who teaches at Bethune. I told Shumanto when he invited me that I am the odd man out in this group, because I sometimes try to gather information from others. And today, of course, I learned a lot from my two previous colleagues, speakers. But I actually will not address the COVID-19 pandemic directly. Let me warn you about this, because I come from cinema studies. I study the cinema, I study sometimes the media, and I'm also a student of literature. I also kind of sometimes work in that area, generally speaking, humanities. So this is not something I'm going to do. I'll just present to you a few thoughts, a few ideas that have occurred to me recently as I spend my days under lockdown. So that's why I kind of sort of offered this title, thinking of the media in days of social distance. So allow me to just look at my notes. I hope you can't see them. It's on this laptop. See, the first thing, these are very basic things. So all of you know this, but sometimes useful to revisit some of the expressions, categories that we use in everyday discussions. So thinking of social distance, the first thing that comes to mind is the fact that media works on the basis of distance. The communication that uses media, social media or the traditional media or any other kind of media, actually works on the basis of people being distant from each other. So that is a precondition of the function of media. But in the time of lockdown, in the time of pandemic, in this completely exceptional, unprecedented experience that we are all going through, one is I am, and I believe many others are, prompted to think, to reflect on some of these very basic ideas, as I was saying, that we usually associate with communication, we associate with sociality, we associate with, when we say social media, we have a certain sense of the social in mind and so on and so forth. We have an opportunity now to rethink some of these categories. That's what the pandemic has afforded us. So, for example, when we say that media presupposes distance between people, because without a certain kind of distance, you don't need the media. So the operative word is, of course, isolation, and we are all aware of this. We are aware of people being isolated. In fact, the lockdown itself is a mandate for isolation. That it asks you to be isolated, asks us to be isolated. But there is also another word that often appears on the horizon, that occurs to us, is the question of solitude, isn't it? And we say very often that we take to social media, we go to Facebook, we go to WhatsApp groups. Some of us have access to other social media accounts in Instagram or some other media. We do these things. So we use the word solitude because we say people are lonely, people want to connect with other people. People form these online groups through WhatsApp and Facebook and so on. Let us remember that the use of media is more pervasive than we think it is, number one. And there is a question of, these two categories have to be kind of thought differently, a little differently. Isolation is something that we understand isolation as a category that kind of is imposed, at least it's not a category, it's a condition, sorry, that is imposed on almost all of us in this time. But as Ruchira was trying to explain just now, it doesn't mean the same thing for all social groups. Isolation is not the same, it doesn't have the same effect on all social groups. There are vast differences. On the other hand, I believe that when it comes to the question of solitude, it is not something that you can easily confine to one social group. We have not studied these things. These are experiences that are unfolding right before our eyes. We don't have the data. We don't have proper surveys. But actually, it would be very, very interesting to observe what people across social classes, what people across regions, across economic groups and so on, how they deal with the question of solitude rather than isolation, because these two are not exactly the same thing. So, and I'm saying this because if you try to connect the question of isolation and solitude to social media, if we try to do that, and we do that all the time, we say that social media gives us a kind of, a kind of way out of isolation, way out of solitude, and so on and so forth. If we try to do that, then we must remember that the question of isolation it could be easier to observe because it's a more social thing. How people's living conditions, their economic class, and so on. But solitude is more of a personal, individual condition. And therefore, it is not easy to see how people behave on social media in terms of expression of solitude or in terms of the struggle with solitude. The struggle with solitude it's not a new thing, but it has taken a new edge. It has taken on a new dimension, as we all know, and we can see from various reports that we are getting from our conversations, the media experience, that it's actually taking on very, very serious proportions. Now, just to present before you a little bit of data. We often make this very easy kind of, we draw this easy conclusion that electronic media, the internet, the mobile phone, these are luxury of the privileged. These are only the privileged have access to this. We often say that only the urban, middle, upper middle, rich people have access to this. We say these things sometimes without thinking much, but let us look at the data, okay? Over the last few years, the developments have been quite quite revealing, so to speak. Thinking of internet users in India, India is the second largest internet-based market after China, okay, in the world. And the internet user data from statista.com, which most people refer to, is actually in early 2020 is 564 million. 564 million, which is more than 56 crores, okay? And there is an interesting twist to that. The Internet and Mobile Association of India, IAMAI, and Nielsen, which is a well-known market survey agency, they have shown that this is the case. This is last year's, yes, this is last year's data, I think. I don't have all those pages open in front of me, but this is last year's data, that actually rural users of internet in India are larger in number than urban users. So it's 227 million active internet users, not only internet connections, active internet users, which is in rural areas in India, which is 10% more than 205 million active internet users in urban India. Okay. So we should not come to quick conclusions about, there is of course a digital divide. No one can deny that, but it's not exactly the way we think it is. Okay? Think of the TRAI, Telephone Regulatory Authority of India, that April 2019 data statistics, which is more than 1 year old actually. Mobile phone subscribers, the total number mobile phone subscribers in India is 1.16 billion, which means it's 116 crores. So it's almost the entire population. And please let us remember that when we say that there are about 564 million internet users in India, they don't count, and they have said that in these reports, they don't count the 5 to 10 year olds in the households, the 5 to 10 year old kids who often use their parents or their elder siblings' internet connection. Okay, so actually the number would be probably a little more. So what has happened? So the question that now kind of, and there are all sorts of Facebook activities or WhatsApp activities. WhatsApp groups have become politically absolutely crucial in India. If you look at the last two general elections, 2014 and 2019, by all accounts, almost all the observers have noticed that millions and millions and millions of rupees have been pumped into the IT cell of the ruling party. It's just a humongous amount of, astronomical amount of money that they have pumped into the IT cell. And the kind of advertisements they have put out, and the other parties also, the non-ruling parties also, but the ruling party mostly put out on Facebook and on Google, are actually, political party-wise, sometimes the largest in the world, okay? And this is because if it was only a penetration of urban population through internet or through mobile data, this picture would be different, okay? So the fact is that actually they have a population penetration. This is the data from the statistics, the media statistics groups. Population penetration 2019 of internet in India is more than 50%, more than 50%. So, and compared with 2015, which was 27%. So this is the kind of increase. So the question is that if you think of people feeling the need to connect with other people through social media, the first thing that we should remember is that this is not an exclusively privileged. These questions are not only relevant questions for the urban, sometimes we call them privileged, well-to-do, let's say, comfortable classes. I don't think that is the case. That has not been the case for some time now. And this brings us to not only the role of media and social media particularly, because we all have come across this word called, this expression called WhatsApp University. It actually should be taken quite seriously. The kind of information that is fed through these networks and groups is something that decides our election results to a very, very large extent. That is one thing. The other thing is that if you think of the kind of questions that I deal with as a film studies kind of person, as someone who teaches and studies cinema and media, is that the question of isolation is not necessarily a privilege or once again, something that is a luxury of only a certain class. That, be that as it may, the question of solitude is not. Okay? It can be individually much more widespread, and it can actually find all sorts of expressions. So this is something that I wanted to flag to begin with. Okay. The second point that one should, which is an obvious point, is that during the pandemic, use of, even though there has been the other sectors of the economy, even some of the traditional media, they have taken a hit. Okay, we all know that. Newspaper, print media has taken a very bad hit. For some reason, people have started believing that the newspaper is a virus carrier, and so on and so forth. But as we all know probably already, but the figures are astounding actually, to say the least, that the online media platforms have seen a phenomenal growth. But interestingly, the largest growth has occurred in television. And there are interesting things that have happened. For example, DD, Doordarshan. For many years, Doordarshan did not see any growth of viewers. Doordarshan has seen since March 2023, Doordarshan has seen a kind of considerable increase in viewership. And viewership boosted by old television programs like Ramayana, like Bunyad, and so on, which only people of my age would remember probably, and so on. So that's an interesting development. Zoom, on which we are speaking now, meeting now, Zoom, as you all know, has seen phenomenal growth. So Zoom, at one point in April, Zoom said they have 300 million daily active users. They have revised that estimate, and they have said, no, not daily active users, daily active participants. So if we are 200 people gathered here today, right now, they will take that as part of that. But 300 million is a number to wonder at, isn't it? But there are many other, the gaming has increased. App downloads have increased manyfold. If you look at all sorts of things, the web chat platforms, and interestingly, podcast. So the media observers, they think that some people have developed a screen fatigue, which arises from long exposure to the screen. So they're now getting more and more into spending more and more time listening to recorded programs, podcasts, and so on. So that is one kind of interesting development that has happened. If we just look at the data the media scholars would find much to ponder and much to kind of reflect on. Reading writing platforms like Wattpad has seen increase of participants, where you can read others' writings, you can also comment, you can interact, so on. So all of that has happened. Now, what this tells us, not on the pandemic, but on a longer scale of time, what this tells us is that media is no longer just a vehicle. It should not be treated as a vehicle that carries our messages across. You know, that there are finished messages. We know what we want to say. Media is only a vehicle. This is a misconception that needs to be corrected, and not only because of the pandemic, but for, as I said, for a longer time scale of evolution of the media. Because what has happened through all this, and we can discuss this if you ask questions later. We don't have much time now. What I think is a better way of, is a better approach to media is to understand it as an extension of reality. Now, when I say that, I don't mean media is a fake reality. Many people think that. I don't think it's a very useful way of looking at this really enormous kind of phenomenon of all sorts of media, especially internet-based media. Internet-based media. Think of OTT. I haven't mentioned OTT, Netflix and Prime Video and Hotstar and so on. They have also seen a very, very high increase. You think of OTT up to WhatsApp and Instagram. The phenomenal kind of growth, spread, extent to which they kind of envelope us. It's an envelope. It's like a second envelope. If nature and social reality is one kind of envelope around us, one kind of medium in which we walk and talk and think and live, media is another one. So it's not fake reality that when I say extension, I don't mean that. What I mean is, if you consider, I mean something more conceptual in nature, something more theoretical in nature. If you just consider the fact that reality is not just a collection of objects, material things. Reality is not really only that. It is a collection of material objects that we can touch, feel, measure, and so on. Reality is also a set of relations without which this object world is meaningless to us. Okay? Reality is also a set of relations. The way we relate to other things, relate to each other, things relate to each other, and so on. If we take that definition of reality, then media is, of course, a web, a network of relations in which we are firmly embedded. We are firmly embedded in it. We are not, it's not as if we switch on our mobile phone and then we get into media. It's not like that anymore. Even when we are not logged in, even when we are not using it, there is a sense in which the media reality is a reality that we constantly pass through, negotiate, handle, grapple with. And there are many occasions, there is a large share of our waking life, our waking day, where we don't even notice that. We don't notice it, that we are doing this. This is one conceptual point, which is not something new that I'm saying, but I wanted to put it before you just to ponder, just for something to think about, okay? Moiti, can you tell me how much time I have? Do I have about
around 5 minutes?
5 minutes, okay. See, there's let's hope this is the last, yes, this is the last question. One or two things I'll just quickly touch on, okay, and come back to, if you, once again, if there is time of discussion. See, what has happened here is that it is extremely important for us politically, socially. You just think of any of these dimensions of our lives, political dimension, every life, every human being has a political dimension. Right? We don't have to be politicians to have a political dimension to our reality and our lives. So it's extremely important that we do not surrender critical intelligence to the media. That is extremely important. And the media induces, the social media especially, if you think of something like Facebook, you know, and I have no doubt about this, if the Facebook phenomenon is anti-critical in nature. When I say that, I don't mean that there's no criticism. I don't mean that. But critical intelligence and writing criticism are not the same thing. You see? So what stalls critical? What creates an obstruction to critical intelligence? See, when we form as isolated individuals, as even lonely individuals, when we form a socius, that is to say, a social bond with others through social media, we form groups, isn't it? We form groups, communities. Facebook is full of communities, right? WhatsApp thrives on communities. WhatsApp groups are actually the backbone of the WhatsApp experience. So when we form these are groups, that communities, and communities are of many kinds. These are the new communities. These communities control, influence, motivate, do a whole lot of things to the users. I don't have to explain this to you. You are all aware of this. You have all thought about this. But what we sometimes do not notice is that the mode of engagement in community life that these platforms like Facebook and others foster is a mode of community formation that rests upon hostility. So that one community is essentially hostile to other community. It's exclusion. If you're a member of this group, then of course we don't see eye to eye with you. And sometimes these hostilities can be really, really troublesome. They can be thoroughly disturbing. They can lead to mental breakdowns. They can lead to even deaths. So this has to be taken seriously, number one. And I don't think suicides and deaths are the only things. There are also other factors that drive our daily lives. Hostility is one thing, but more common and more unnoticed is the practice of opinion mongering. I use a slightly sort of negative term, mongering, because that is what we are all now given to. I'm not excluding myself. I'm not saying I'm beyond all this. Okay? That actually the community formation thrives. Your individual presence on the social media, as well as your community presence, collective participation on social media thrives on opinion mongering. So you give opinion on everything under the sun. Now, this is anti-critical. What I call critical intelligence asks for reflection, asks for patient analysis, asks for debate. These are crucial things. Asks for listening to others, and so on and so forth. Opinion mongering does not have the time or the patience for any of this. So you say, I like, I don't like. That's all. And you sometimes write longer posts. We say why we don't like, why we like, and so on. So you saw that, there was anything from political events to a Bollywood actor's suicide to some personal some personal experience. We immediately give a like and don't like kind of, not only the like button, but that kind of opinion. This opinion mongering goes against critical reflection. when I say critical, I don't mean negative. I mean critical, I use the word critical in analytical sense, understanding. An understanding that takes into account debate, reflection, and patient thinking. This is anti-thought. This is anti-thought. So, I'll just give you an example. This is Satyajit Ray's centenary. So I came across a couple of remarks on the Facebook recently where quite intelligent people, knowledgeable people, they said, oh, okay, it's his centenary and so on. Great, but I don't like Satyajit Ray. Now, you see, this is patently insipid. This is why I call it anti-critical, non-critical, because Satyajit Ray is a kind of inheritance, is something that we have inherited as a major body of work, as a major body of cinematic work, artistic work, literary work, and so on, which we have to come to terms with. And you may not finally endorse all his positions and so on and so forth, but you engage with it. You don't say, I don't like Chaucer, I don't like Shakespeare, I don't like Chaplin, I don't like, it's not a question of your liking. It's not a question of my liking and not liking. It's a question of my coming to terms with somebody's suicide, somebody's great artistic production, life work, and finding my own kind of, deriving my own lessons from it. So I don't mourn the loss of a life. I give opinion. The moment the suicide happens, I give up who is responsible, who has to be taken to task, who has to go and see immediately a doctor and psychiatrist. And so we don't have the time to sit, reflect, process, mourn. Like a shock palon kara bole. We don't have the time to even mourn. So that is, I think, one of the real kind of, I think this is now receiving a boost in the time of pandemic. Almost everyone has taken to social media, and everyone is voicing opinion on everything under the sun. Okay, and sometimes these are developing into an acrimony that is painful to see. Just the last point, I won't take any more time, Moiti, sorry about this. The last point is related to this. Communication, we are talking about communication. Communication is something that is also, because I'm a student of humanities, as I said, I'm interested in artistic, creative activities. I'm interested in art. I take it absolutely seriously, no less seriously than any other aspect of material life. I think communication is taking on such a really, is taking such a precedence over our lives, that one has to be careful that art is not communication. This is again a misunderstanding that often people have. When we talk about communication, we think of finished messages, finished information that we want to get across. That's why I said media is treated as a vehicle. In communication, it is treated as a vehicle. Okay, mostly. But in creative experience, whether it's a craft experience, or it's making something, a creative experience can happen in many spheres of life, not only on the canvas or with a camera or on the page with a pen. It can happen in many spheres of life. It's actually a fundamental aspect of humanity. To be creative is not to give a finished message and a finished truth to others. It is to actually subject what you know to an exploration. So I think what I find slightly disturbing and sometimes quite disturbing in the media activity is this real impatience to get across a message. As if you know what is politically correct, as if you know that you are the only person who is politically correct, the others are not, as if you know what is to be done with the poor, as if you know what is to be done with women, as if you know everything in the world. That there are, of course, At the level of social action, we have to know and we have to act, but not at the level of creative experience. We actually try to reach the unknowable, at least the unknown. We try to put all our received truths under some kind of scrutiny. We explore. This is something that communication often hampers. This is what I wanted to point out to end my presentation, that I think one should be we should be on our guard against some of these tendencies that the social media often fosters. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Professor Vishwas. I am taking this point of yours that media should not be treated just as a vehicle, and the approach to media should be an extension of reality. Thank you so much, sir. So I would now start the question answer session, and I would request all our respected guests to switch on their videos. Yeah, I can see all of you. So let me start with the questions, and the questions are flowing in. You can take it one by one, so as you wish, or if you want to like say something in between also, like the other speakers might also answer for a question put forward for some speaker. So I would start with Professor Senaroy, and a lot of questions have come, but I don't know, because of the shortage of time, I might take a few of them. So Professor Senaroy, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. Can I do one thing? There
Yes,
are a lot
sir.
of questions for me, and
Yeah.
there are some common questions. So can I club them and answer?
Yeah, yeah,
I've
of course,
jotted them.
of course.
I've
You have
jotted
jotted
them.
them.
I've
Oh.
jotted them down. Jotted
Oh.
them down. The
So
questions
yeah,
directed to me.
absolutely yours. Absolutely yours.
Okay, thank you. Now, I have broadly classified the questions, and the first kind of question that is coming to me is the kind of fiscal package that has to be given by the government to the Indian citizens. It is necessary to point out the fiscal package has to be necessarily targeted. The regular workers cannot be given right at the moment. The people who are at the margin, they have to be protected. The institutions which are at the margin, the MSMEs which are at the margin, they have to be protected. And fiscal package in terms of direct cash transfers have to be done. Fiscal package in terms of direct cash transfers, that is one, or tax breaks. These are the two fiscal packages that need to be done to the people. The second, and if that means that the FRBM limits are crossed, you can cross the FRBM limits. There is no problem if the government cross the FRBM limits. And in that case, the government has said that by having a stimulus package of 20 lakh crore rupees, it is almost giving 10% of GDP. It is actually, if you look at the fiscal package out of the entire stimulus package, it's only 2% of not even 2% of GDP. So if it is not 2% of GDP, then if it is not 2% of GDP, then what it needs to be done, the fiscal stimulus has to be increased or enhanced so that money goes to the hands of people who are cashless. It can go by direct cash transfer. Direct cash transfers to the marginalized is a problem because all of them may not be financially inclusive. They might not have bank accounts. So it is the duty of the government, the local governments, and not only the state governments, the governments at the lower level, even the panchayats, they have to identify people who are jobless, and first to them, it has to be given money to start their consumption. Once consumption picks up, then only the economy gets some impetus, the producers get some impetus to produce. But in the meantime, there has to be some packages and unlockdown schemes through which the supply side has to be gradually resumed. So it cannot be left to the market alone. The market alone will not ultimately solve the demand supply balance. The government has to actively intervene, and it is not through monetary stimulus, monetary policy, which will lead the economy back on the rails. Lowering of interest rates, disbursement of credit. MSMEs will not take credit. I have argued it again and again. And even if you think of the government giving some support, there has to be hand-holding by the government. And there has to be hand-holding by the government to the MSMEs so that they can, if they want loans, they can take loans. Unless there is hand-holding by the government, so has to be a proactive intervention by the government. Now, in this context, at this moment, if we talk about the self-reliant economy, then the self-reliant economy does not work. Self-reliant economy does not work. Already we have moved ahead with globalization significantly. And to deglobalize the economy is actually to turn the wheel. It is not possible within the parameters of globalization, because our production system is now dependent on a lot of things from the rest of the world. Our production system is dependent on a lot of things from the rest of the world. Inputs, not only labor, it is dependent on raw materials and capital goods. So thinking of global self-reliant independence of the economy is not feasible at the point of time. To revive the economy, it's to ease the supply shocks, to restart, so that the supply chains resume in the economy, and give fiscal stimulus slowly to the unprivileged, to the marginalized, so that consumption, investment picks up and the economy comes back to the rail. There is demand pickup in the economy slowly. Now, this has to be governed by the government. The government has to take effective measures. Now, this is one sort of questions that I was asked. And now, the second sort of questions that I was asked is actually with regards to the garment sector, and with regards to other sectors of the economy. The first thing that the government has to do, ensure the supply chain. The inputs to production has to resume, and for that, logistics has to start working. Unless logistics start working, unless inputs come back to places of production, supply chain cannot resume. And given the restarting of production, the demand has to slowly pick up. Things will not happen overnight. People have to wait and watch, because unless both demand and supply are given proper impetus to come back, unless there has been proactive interventions by the government, things will not, and the equilibrium of the economy will not be reached. Now, there are financial contagion in the economy. It has been shown that the share market did decline, and with certain packages, the share market did work, but there are what people have thought of, people have gone people have gone for financial shocks, and they take the panic-driven situation to withdraw from the financial market, unless they resume back in investing in the financial market, it will spread and people will go for safer assets. Which are the safer assets? Two safer assets are there. Whatever, one is gold, they will not sell off their gold. The other is land. People will not sell off the land because the prices of gold and land has obviously fallen. Real estate is not working, so all prices have fallen. There is a widespread problem, but people will hold on to it, and the spread will continue till the economy looks back. With respect to trade, yes, with respect to trade, it is important that the supply of inputs from the rest of the world should come, and we move into the global value chains. Till now, India's share in global value chain is very poor. Till now, India's share in global value chain is very low, and India does not actually figure anywhere in the global value chain with any kind of production, So any kind of export. So if India has to go back to the global value chain, it has to welcome investment from the rest of the world. It has to welcome inputs from the rest of the world. And in that context, both Chinese goods, Chinese imports of capital goods and raw materials, and Chinese investments are important. So connectivity, our connection with the rest of the world should not go down. And this is not the way that Atmanirbhar Bharat can be defined. It is a very wrong policy at this moment of the hour. So let me stop at that. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Sinha Roy. May I now request Professor Goswami to answer a few questions? Professor Goswami, can you hear me?
Yes, I can. And I have done the same thing, which is to sort of clarify.
Yeah.
Much time, because I'm sure that we are well past the time of, so I'll just quickly run. There are some questions on which I haven't spoken at all. So I'm really not in a position to answer some of them, but I'll just touch. There have been questions around mental health and mental health of children and what should we do about it. Yes, that, you know, when children with lots of energy are cooped in home, then there is a crisis in the sense, what do you do? And a lot of children also have to do a lot of e-learning. They are hooked onto computers throughout the day, etc. So mental health of children is complex analysis. I think that we need to do quick fix solution. I'm not a person, I don't, I work around child rights, but I don't work around child psychology. So I'm just not the right person to ask. But there are online mental health professionals who are now giving online counseling. While that does not replace the kind of experience to sit across, at least that is something. And some of these counseling services are coming for free for women and children. So if a child really is having issues at home, I think one way would be to use these counseling platforms that are available. For other things, I think, and also kids, I don't know, because the person who asked the question did not tell me the age of the child. So the way you're going to deal with a 5-year-old is not the way you're going to deal with a 17-year-old. Their problems, their needs are very, very different. But to quickly say that since they can't go out, one is to engage them. I understand that it's very difficult, but to spend a little more quality time with them. So each one of these questions actually warrant a separate discussion. So I'll just quickly just touch upon. Now, there have been a number of questions of social equality in education and on e-learning. So I'll just quickly sort of talk of them together, which is, and what do we do about is this? Is the COVID time a kind of taking advantage of the gaps in the system and moving towards privatization? And I think yes. I mean, this is my opinion, and we can sort of, to use Moin Akhtar's word, do a critical analysis of, why I think that these times are typically the times in which more and more privatization are going to happen, right? But clearly, what is the percentage of the budget in education? It's measly. India is one of those countries in the world which is really, really low budgetary allocation for both education and health. And that explains our, I wouldn't say inability, but the challenges of the pandemic, right? In all countries where you have put in more budgetary allocation for basic human rights and social needs of people, we know that we will be able to handle a crisis better. Education is that one area, I think, in which there is very little allocation, and therefore social inequality, in a way, is increasing and will increase. There are a lot of questions on e-learning, and is the e-learning the solution? Is the e-learning the way out? To quickly say that, again, an opinion which, again, would need a lot of time. E-learning here to stay, and we will, and at a time when we will be able to come back to sort of going into physical spaces again, that e-learning and actually walking into classrooms would coexist. Let's not look at e-learning as a temporary phase. I think that the e-learning is not going to go away. Now, the problems of, again, digital divide in cases of e-learning. Thank you, Moin Akhtar, for putting that data on internet users and mobile phone users. But I had the occasion of having discussions with government school teachers and also private school teachers in West Bengal. And while a lot of young people have access to internet, and they could also be maybe on social media, and they might also have mobile phones, to actually do classes would require fast speed internet and uninterrupted, right? And we know that even for the urban middle class, we don't know how to operate on, say, a platform, say like Zoom, and then on WebEx or something else. Teachers are grappling with it. So we clearly know that while students can be WhatsApp users and mobile phone users, their access to an Android phone and also access to a 4G does not exist. Their access to such platforms like Zoom and laptops don't exist. Also, what I found very, very interesting is that assuming that you have this access, assuming that a child gets a laptop, right? And also gets a 4G, whatever, internet. I might not want, as a child living in a shanty, the outside world to peek into my room. There is a sense of voyeurism. I can actually see what's going behind. I can see the books. I can see what's the plant on your table. And a lot of people and a lot of children do not want. And this has come out in a lot of data in New York and in US, where children of color did not want, when the internet e-learning started, the teachers and his friends look into his house because he just might be living in a space. So so while, I mean, to use the word digital divide in a little more, I would say, specific sense, digital e-learning is a class phenomenon. Only certain people would benefit by it and certain people will not. And clearly the divide is going to be clear, because while I will have access to digital archives and various kinds of platforms which are now free, certain that child in Hingolganj village in a government school will not have access to it, right? So But it's also important to understand that I think e-learning is here to stay. And so we might as well find out ways. What to do about it? There was this discussion with the school teachers group that I had, and they were suggesting things like digital scholarship. You have Konnasri and different kinds of scholarship. Why can't we have digital scholarship, right? So the giving of laptops, the giving of internet to certain users. It could be merit come means, it could be other, but we really need to think about different kinds of scholarships, which is going to enable e-learning. That's important. We really cannot have children in public government schools or colleges to be completely out. And you really cannot do teaching on WhatsApp. Also, that e-learning, very right, that the social media is a real thing. It's, as Moinagda was saying, it's not the completed thing, but this tactical experience of being in a class with students is lost, I really want to sit with people, and that tactical experience of looking into children's faces to see their response, and looking at the two other speakers and myself, it's not the nicest of experience, right? So so we really need to get back to physical spaces, and I'm not saying that this is an unreal space, but both the realities should coexist, and I think that is where we need to go back to our own educational institutions. I deliberately didn't talk about the role of judiciary, and that question has come up, that what has been the role of the judiciary, and has the judiciary, what about the migrant workers? Why only talk about the judiciary? All of us, when the lockdown was announced within 4 hours, it seemed that the migrant workers were invisible. Only when this exodus started happening did we sit up and realize. And for privileged people like me, when it got terrible, when I was, and I'm just speaking personal experience, when I could not take in those images, I just switched off, right? I started watching a happy film, right? So I think all of us, I'm doing a sweeping generalization, which might not be true, were completely absent about the plight of the migrant workers. And the judiciary is no exception. What it could have done is to immediately, sort of means on its own take cognizance and do, which it didn't. And which speaks volumes of the changed circumstances that we live in. And this warrants a different discussion on what the judiciary could have and perhaps not do. And this is sort of a shifting role that we are seeing. But it's happening across the board. All of us are doing it. And finally, there's this very interesting question on if social distance promotes caste, class, is continuum, and physical distance promotes alienation, then what should we do? I am not here, I was not arguing that don't wear mask or don't do physical distancing or get all your friends and have a great party. I was not doing that thing. Yes, these are not the best things that perhaps I would like, but these are here to stay, so we might as well follow these rules. All that I'm trying to say here, that this imposition of following rules will not be abided by many. And that is what I was saying of the social and the cultural capital of the middle class, because I have the privilege of knowledge, I have the privilege of my home and the money to practice social and physical distancing, because my location is that of the privileged upper middle, upper caste, right? Which is not. So when we are villainizing people for not following the lockdown and saying that they are callous, I'm not saying that they are not callous. All that I'm saying is that this is bound to happen where you have such deep inequalities. So the answer to handling this is that we need to address inequities. This pandemic does not have a quick fix. We need to address inequities in a very large sense. We need to address questions of squalor, of homelessness, of housing crunch, of right to food. All of these human rights need to be assured. Without that, I'm coming back to my original position that this pandemic is only going to increase social inequalities of all kinds. So the answer, there is no quick fix solution. We need to analyze, and back to the point that we need to do more sociological, political, economic research, which has one peg, which is shared humanity. But this is what is missing. You know, we are living in times where everybody is suspect. You know, it sort of sounds like we are back into the, you know, into the Gestapo era. Everybody is suspect. I don't know. So, you know, and we are talking about shared humanity projects. It's not going to come so soon. I'm apprehensive of my neighbor. Yeah, I'm apprehensive of this girl who comes to wash his dishes. Where is shared humanity? But I think it's the shared humanity, sociological and political economic research project that we need to do. I'm not saying do not do physical distancing. I'm just saying that we need to be aware of what kind of prejudices are coming to the surface, and let's be a little wary of it. I think that's all that I was trying to say. Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Dr. Goswami. So now...
Oh, sorry, Maitri, one more question. Sorry. Can I just ask one? Somebody said that, has this pandemic hampered our relationship with our relatives?
Yeah, that was a question. Right.
I think not, you know, because I have more time. I come from this privileged salaried employee. I haven't had a job cut, I'm a salary cut the year. So I have a little more time on my hands, right? So I'm calling up more people, touching base with friends. So it's not that it's hampering. Yes, it's critical because I can't go and meet elderly relatives, my parents, but not necessarily that it's going to hamper. We need to evolve and find new ways of really reaching out to people, right? And as Moinanda was already saying, the social media is the way out. We anyway use it. Let's use it a little more, maybe. Maybe not Facebook, but maybe other platforms that we're comfortable with. So for me, it does not mean hampering. It just means the physical, which is very, very precious. The physicalness, that tactical experience is lost. But let's take this as an opportunity to forge solidarities instead of breaking them down. So let's just be optimistic. You know, just being sad doesn't help anyone. Yeah. So yeah, that's my point. I think we need to go to the third speaker. Thank you very much. Yes.
Thank you so very much. Now, Professor Bishwas, what do? I read out the question.
Can you do that? Because there's a barrage of questions and
I know there's a lot of questions, but then I've written down some. So
well, okay. I have located one question that has been asked twice. Anyway, you go ahead. Go ahead.
Okay, go ahead. I'll ask you the question. What are the scopes of the established names at sites like podcast channels once the internet media web relations slow down again after the I think what is this? What is this? Please tell me what is this? After the pandemic goes off and everything slows down, and this is just a little distraction for the time, and it should be taken very lightly at this point of time.
Well, the answer is it's a dystopic question. You know,
yes.
I know.
Yeah.
But it is a question.
So if the pandemic goes away and then there's further slowing down of the media, then we may not see each other's faces again. And that's the only answer that you have, which is not a good thing to happen. But nobody can speculate on that. You see, the media that we have talked about, the media that we have with us now are not none of them are really recent. They have been there around for a while, isn't it? So it's not likely that everything will go away. And without a broadband, fast internet connection, the global economy today will not function, even for a few hours. You know, so it's if you think that this is going to slow down and then stop, and internet will not work, I think that's what you're saying, then in any case, we have no future. So, so yeah, we are looking at a very, very dismal kind of prospect there. What
And
can
I
I say?
think there's
Let's hope that doesn't happen.
yeah, and I think there's a related question. I mean, what, in your opinion, would be the long-term effects of excessive dependence on electronic media?
See, I can't say that because there are people who study this. I mean, they've been studying such stuff for very, very long. The more interesting surveys that I've seen about television watching and internet use are all done over at least 10 years, if not more. So unless you do such long-term and with a huge sample size, and you go actually to various sections of people across territories and regions, there's no point in speculating because you don't know what the impact is going to be. The only thing that one could say for sure is that many of us, especially the generation that at least my son's generation, are kind of connected or related to their handheld devices like mobile phones in a way that we were not. Even today, we are not. So it is. I don't have a negative or a positive evaluation. It's a different kind of relationship with the environment. They're almost like cyborgs. One of my sons doesn't even let go of his phone even when he goes for a shower. I don't know how he manages to do that. But when I tell him that you have become a zombie, he is not happy at all. He says, you don't know, you don't understand. So we don't know, but at the same time, there have been surveys that have seen behavioral changes, at least within family units, over a long period of time. But those are things that we can't, there's no time to talk about them right now. Those surveys have happened, they've already happened. Mostly Europe and the US, I'm talking about, yeah. India, I haven't come across any substantial media user survey, apart from just how much time you spend, is it commute time, is it evening time? Apart from that, those kind of stuff, I haven't come across much of that, no.
Okay. So would you just take one more question, which has come from a student of ours? So should you answer that if I put the question?
Yeah, of course, of course.
So a student asks that, sir, the use of fake news on media of all forms is turning out to be more harmful in the current situation of the pandemic. While the audience definitely need to be critical about what they come across and accepting as truth, how important is it to ensure filtering out of such fake news from the supply side, that is the media platform, and what might be the impediments in ensuring the same?
Yes, that's a very important question, very important. We are all concerned with it. And we know that fake news has taken on a very, very alarming proportion, very alarming. And so, you must have also noticed that there is now technology. The technology existed, but it's now become cheaper and within the reach of the big political parties of deep fake, what is being called a deep fake. The deep fake has been used in the last Delhi elections, Delhi Vidhan Sabha elections. The BJP Delhi sort of unit leader, there was a video where he speaks a certain kind of Hindi on a video, where actually it is a deep fake. Vice News India first broke that news. Now everybody knows he did not speak those lines. It's all dubbing. They actually manipulated his lip movements. Okay, if you've seen recently this film by Martin Scorsese called The Irishman, they spent millions and millions of dollars to actually turn Joe Pesci, Robert De Niro, and Al Pacino into at least 30, 40 years younger. So 3 massive kind of major technical teams were involved in doing it. These are deep fakes, but in a fiction film by Martin Scorsese, it means one thing. In political propaganda, it means something completely different. It can have really, really alarming kind of effects, number one. Filtering is already being done by people. There are agencies who act as watchdogs, and they constantly tell you that these are, fake news and so on. But does it really matter? Because once again, if you are completely dependent on opinion mongering, then you don't want to listen to other alternative points of view. We don't even have the patience or the time to do that. So what WhatsApp University does is to constantly tell you that Tablighi Jamaat is responsible for the whole COVID breakup. It goes on saying that, goes on. And so after a point, the members of these WhatsApp groups are many. They're members of 50,000, 5 lakhs. I mean, each group is a huge kind of, as a population of many members. So they go on telling you that these minority groups are already trying to take away your daughters. They're trying to, there's love jihad. They will say there's a land jihad. They're trying to take away your land. So actually now, quote unquote, educated, intelligent people have begun to believe these things. So there's also this willingness to believe in certain things. So no amount of filtering will work unless, a kind of critical intelligence is given us a precedence over what your heart says. My intuition tells me that they are dangerous to society. They're taking away our jobs, our land, our homes, our territory, and so on and so forth. If you go on doing that, I don't know. Once again, I'm sorry I'm saying I don't know to all the questions because no one knows. But the thing is that the proportions of this danger, you are right. They are, see, there is a political party, a government that cannot solve any of your economic problems. Actually, the economic situation is so bad, and Shoykot has given us a quick recap of that, but it has been bad for a long time, as he also said. So the people who are affected by this downturn, by unemployment, low growth, by all of these things, production kind of, decline and so on, people who are affected by this, how do they go and still vote for a certain kind of political group or political party? So ideology rules. This is something that we learn from our young days, that it's a material conditions in the society that should rule, that should determine the ideological basis. This is the classical Marxist thing, but there are moments when it shows that ideology rules. You are voting for a Bolsonaro, voting for a Trump, voting for a Viktor Orban, voting for whoever it is. I'm not naming all of them. So, the British Prime Minister. You're voting in large numbers. You are the most affected of the lot. Very often. How does that happen? You are affected by the material conditions. This is why they spend so much energy, money, resources on media, because they know that's where things are being decided.
Thank you so much, Professor Biswas. I think we should close the question answer session now. And on behalf of Bethune College, Kolkata and Internal Quality Assurance Cell, I thank all our distinguished guests and our respected principal, Professor Krishna Roy. I thank Professor Komalkanti Shom, Coordinator IQAC, Dr. Amita Kaur, TCS, and all respected members of IQAC for their sincere efforts. I thank Dr. Shashwati Laha, Dr. Shutapa Dotto, and Dr. Saurabh Ganguly for all-round and constant support. I especially thank my colleague, Professor Sumanto Mukhopadhyay, and my student, Shagota Ghosh, for their efforts. And my sincere thanks to Mr. Akash Mondol of Braindrops for providing all possible technical support. Last but definitely not the least, I extend my sincere thanks to all the participants of this webinar, without whom this webinar was never possible. Thank you all. Thank you so much.